We identified 5,985 leak posts in 2024. In other words, do you know what percentage of those companies we believe actually paid?
15%.
32.9%. The latest innovation coming from UK government, which is implementing backdoors. I was shaking my head at the policymakers. I don't give It's got to be said, we've prevented $1 billion of ransomware from going into the hands of criminals. We've been very vocal about the fact that actually I don't believe banning ransomware payments will have an impact. We will end up pushing the payments environment deeper underground. There were 21 net new ransomware groups targeting smaller organizations, making less waves. And those are the ones that organizations are probably concerned about, I feel.
Welcome to the In Conversation series with Saepio Information Systems. My name is Amir Nooriala. I'm your host and I'm one of the co-CEOs at Saepio. Today we're going to be talking to Raj Samani. Raj, welcome.
Hi.
Now Raj, I've got a few notes here because, you know, when you do your prep on someone's background, yours is very impressive. I don't want to miss anything out. But the first thing I have to say is you have the best job title in the world, not only an SVP, but the chief scientist at Rapid7. And as my 9-year-old daughter would say, that is a job title that slays. So how do you get a job title like that?
Well, it's a tough, I mean, it's not a difficult question. Actually, you know, partly because the role of data science now has become certainly very ubiquitous within the cybersecurity industry. We've had to change the way that we approach things. And so it's part kind of data science, but actually also running the labs division. I think it just fits fairly well with regards to what we're doing.
Brilliant. And just to give everyone else a bit more background on why Raj has that title, because he's not the kind of person who'd actually talk about himself in that way. Raj has assisted through his career multiple different law agencies in cybercrime cases. You're a special advisor to the European Cybercrime Centre, i.e. EC3 in The Hague. Then I really like this bit. In terms of industry recognition, you're in the Infosecurity Europe Hall of Fame. The Peter Saw Award, people don't know what that is. That's specifically recognizing security research. The Intel Achievement Award. And also you co-authored a number of books, including Applied Cybersecurity and the Smart Grid and the CSA Guide to Cloud Computing. And you also do a lot of technical editing as well. So that's the less humble answer to the question, which you are too humble to obviously say. So very honored that you've agreed to give us your time. Thank you so much for that. What I thought I would do is a kind of a backdrop for our conversation is start off talking about the UK government's proposed ransomware payment ban. So for context for those who don't know, that ban, my understanding is it's going to be focused on the public sector and critical infrastructure rather than private sector. And it's also going to include mandatory instant reporting of any attacks that happen.
Sorry, I shook my head, by the way, and not because of what Amir said, because I thought we were going to talk about also the latest innovation coming from UK government, which is implementing backdoors.
Yes.
And so,
which is a Labour government recent thing,
which is brand new. And I was shaking my head, not at Amir, because Amir's great, at the policymakers. I don't give a It's got to be said.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it has to be said. We have made the decision to live in the United Kingdom. We depend upon the UK government to work in conjunction with private industry in terms of making decisions about what is best for the security and privacy of its citizens. Equally, it is imperative to run a safe and secure society because you've just heard, like the Chancellor talking about wanting to stimulate growth in the United Kingdom. And it is a very competitive environment. Now, quick plug, we at Rapid7 have a huge amount of research, innovation, engineering, as well as sales and back office operations here in the United Kingdom, for example, in Belfast, in Reading and so forth. And I live here, so obviously it's important for me. What I will say is, like, ask what the objective is. Is the objective, like banning ransomware payments, is the objective to stop ransomware? And do we honestly, like you listening to this, do you honestly believe by banning it, it's not going to happen? I mean, Think of social media.
But hang on, so you've actually read my question. So my question was going to be, what impact do you think this ban will have?
None.
So you're saying, okay, none.
Well, no. I mean, look, and I've said this publicly and openly in the past, is like I co-founded No More Ransom in 2016. Yes. We've prevented $1 billion of ransomware from going into the hands of criminal. We've been very vocal about the fact that actually I don't believe banning ransomware payments will have an impact. You know, a good example is like, actually that's a ridiculous example, but like, you know,
let's go with it.
There's, you know, like for my kids who use social media, there is a requirement for them to be over 13 years old. Correct. And yet everybody sitting and listening and watching this know that their kids that are under 13 are using these devices. What will happen is, all we will end up doing is we will end up pushing the payments environment deeper underground. Yeah. And we work in an industry that's incredibly opaque. Yeah. Like, you know, criminals have better visibility about what we do as an industry than we have of them. And so what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to track the ransomware demands. I mean, like, for example, we track every threat group for ransomware. Yeah. And we identified 5,985 leak posts in 2024. In other words, companies that had been compromised. Yeah. Do you know what percentage of those companies we believe actually paid?
I'm going to guess here 15%.
32.9%.
Okay. Wow.
The mean amount that they were paying is $479,000.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Based upon that, if we extrapolate it, like for example, the Ransom Hub team would have made, we estimate, at least $41 million. Yeah. So we are saying, by signing a piece of paper, they're going to go, do you know what? We made $50 million last year. That's enough. We'll just put it in ISAs and pensions, and we'll just invest it with compound interest, and we're fine. Yeah. We're going to give up crime. That's it. It's not going to work. Or actually, this companies in the UK, we won't target them.
What do you think of the view that says, so you want to ban public sector and critical national infrastructure? What if they do get hacked? Are you actually going to have, as a result, let's say critical national infrastructure is hit with a ransomware attack, let's say it's like the energy grid in Texas that happened recently, are we actually going to have a slower resolution time because they can't pay, and therefore we're going to have larger outages?
Well, look, I think, like my adage is always never to pay. Yeah. Always has been. And it seems quite hypocritical that I'm saying, well, why are you saying ban ransomware payments when you actually don't endorse, the paying of ransomware payments? But I think, look, there has to be some pragmatism. Mm-hmm. For example, if you remember when the health service got targeted, not by WannaCry, but in Ireland, for example, when they got targeted, and they made a decision not to pay. Yeah. And one can argue that was the right decision morally to take. But equally, there has to be some nuance whereby if you think, well, okay, if it's impacting the ability for people to get patient care, and if it costs, X amount to get the key, and the return on investment with regards to rebuilding the entire environment and restoring from backup is going to be X, then maybe there needs to be a degree of pragmatism. And maybe what we do is, okay, let's not outright ban ransomware payments, but let's work with private industry to figure out if there is a way to do this where, the payments aren't being hidden underground. Maybe there's a clearinghouse, maybe there's an opportunity to do something. I mean,
makes sense.
We did it with No More Ransom, where everybody said, well, there's no alternative. And we said, well, actually, why don't we disrupt the criminals, extract the decryption keys and make them available? We prevented $1 billion now going into the hands of criminals. But I think the frustrating part is there's not even a discussion where, like, you or myself or others are having the opportunity to say, okay, well, what are the options and what can we realistically do? And I suspect what will happen is those companies that are UK-based may just pay the ransoms through their, non-UK subsidiaries.
Yeah, okay. Interesting angle. Okay.
I mean, if you're a CEO and you're being told, okay, well, it's $400,000 to get my systems back online and not suffer the reputational impact of having my data.
And days of revenue loss as well.
Exactly. Right. You will make that decision. It is a business decision that you will take.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what about the angle that people will say, as Saepio, our customer base are primarily enterprise, mid-market, so not what's being banned. What about the concern that sector's saying that, well, all you're going to do is shift the criminals onto us now?
They're already there.
So you don't think that there's not going to be more attacks?
No, they're already there. Because, ironically, we analysed all of the ransomware breaches that we'd identified. And statistically, you are more likely to be targeted and compromised by ransomware if your revenue is between 5 and 10 million US dollars or pounds or so forth. So they're already there. And actually, ironically, so there's 75 ransomware groups generally that are operational. Of those, about 45 of them are active on a per monthly basis. But we had a look and we said, well, in the first 6 months of last year, there were 21 net new ransomware groups. Brand new. And like, I couldn't name them. Because they operate so beneath the radar that it's not like the Clop that's like exploiting ODAs. They're actually targeting smaller organizations, making less waves. And those are the ones that organizations are probably concerned about, I feel.
Okay, so let's take the conversation to a positive angle. So,
is there such a thing in this industry?
Absolutely, and I want to show you. So no, not, I said positive. So you obviously work for Rapid7, and part of the answer is just buy lots of software or buy MDR or buy a managed service, whatever else. Other than spend money on software or third-party help, what other things would you recommend firms do to increase their resilience against these kind of attacks? The
first thing you need to do, it's funny, I had a conversation with a good friend of mine. He runs a consulting company. And he said to me, the first thing I do in any engagement is ask a company, what's your ransomware policy? And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, think about it. Like, if you've been targeted by ransomware and you've been compromised, what's the first thing that you do? Who do you call? Do you pay? If you are going to pay, how are you going to handle? Like, just know what your plan is. And I would say, and it's not a software discussion.
Absolutely not.
And it seems obvious, but I remember I got a call from a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, and he knew me because we had mutual friends, and he says, so on and so forth said I should call you because you do cyber. It's funny, I don't get calls about fixing computers anymore. No. I get calls about ransomware. And he's like, this guy's got a huge business. And he says, we've been hit by the dark side ransomware group, which is the crew that hit Colonial Pipeline. And at the time, I remember, I think we actually had some decryption keys available within No More Ransom. And I said, well, why don't you just get the decryption keys? And he said, well, actually, it's a newer variant, so the keys we had didn't work. And I said, well, look, don't pay. And he says, well, I kind of have to. I've got no choice. And think about it, this is the CEO of this company dealing with it. And the reason he was dealing with it was because he didn't want it to get out, because, of course, they'd exfilled the data and they were going to release it to all of their, all of his partners and stakeholders. So he was concerned about the reputational impact. And that's a really good example of somebody having to just figure out their policy in real time. And that's why I would say the first question you need to be asking yourself, and maybe you call Saepio, for example, and say, look, what are the things I need to think about? Do you have a call-off contract with regards to incident response? Will you contact law enforcement straight away? How are you going to handle communications? Are you going to pay? And actually, are you allowed to pay? Because, of course, if the ransomware group is coming from a territory where there are export controls, then you may legally not be allowed to pay. And so how do you kind of deal with the impact of that, I think, is probably the key thing. So I would say it's not the first step you need to take is not a technical response. It's more of a, well, let's actually have a meaningful discussion.
Okay, so I mean, on that topic, I've got a question, and I have a strong opinion on this, but this conversation is not about my opinion, it's about your opinion. So
it's a conversation, so let's have it.
So how effective do you think, specifically on the topic you mentioned, how effective do you think tabletop exercises, crisis simulations are to address what you're saying about get your policy in place, understand what everyone's role is, what are the steps you're going to take?
Well, I'm really doing my best not to quote Mike Tyson.
Okay.
Everyone has a plan. I think it's useful, unequivocally, but in a real crisis, it's never going to go that smoothly. But but look, I do jiu-jitsu. I train every single week, and the reason I do that is because when you're on the mats, it improves you. So I think building that muscle memory is key and is important. So I would say, look, certainly by all means go through it, but also start to anticipate what happens if the CEO is not around, or what if the legal counsel's not available, or and invariably you'll be presented with things that you just never expect. I've done so many I've done so many incident response, led many incident responses, and even still there are some things that come up where I was like, wow, that's new. I'd never seen that before. I remember once we did an investigation, and it was an APT group that had been inside the environment for 7 years. And I had to ask the CEO, do you mind if we keep the threat actors in your network? And we literally sat there for like 3 months watching the threat group steal data. And that's rare, because in most cases the response is no, absolutely not, kick them out. And this response, oh yeah, that's fine. I'd never dealt with an incident where somebody had been there for like anything more than maybe like 6 to 9 months. And here I was dealing with, turned out to be 7 years actually.
Wow.
But that's the irony. Like there will always be these curveballs that because in that particular instance, we knew that if we closed the back doors that had been put inside the network that we knew of, they'd been there so long that the likelihood is that they'd created additional persistence mechanisms. So we had to monitor and watch what they had to see if there's any other back doors, because the second we kicked them out, like what we called strike day, what would happen is they'd just come in via another back door and then probably like nix the environment.
The whole thing, No, I mean, my view on tabletops or crisis simulations is, due to the nature of what kind of people work in cyber, they're not necessarily the most articulate at explaining why you need budget, or why these policies need to place, or why human risk is such an important thing to train on. And just putting the executives through an exercise articulates it for them in a way that then can unlock budget or prioritization. It's not necessarily about the muscle memory, which is very useful, but it's also about just visualizing what it is you're trying to prevent, and therefore why you need the protections in place.
But I think that's a really good point, because we talk about how do we get engagement, and I don't think there's any question that the awareness of the need for cybersecurity has never been higher.
Right.
But the challenge we face is that the ability to be able to have a meaningful conversation around what the risk is difficult to articulate. So it's funny, I had a conversation with a CIO yesterday, and I said to them, well, you are being targeted by APT groups. Understanding the role of attribution, is that something that's beneficial to your board? And it's like, well, no, they don't really care. That's the money you're getting, and that's what we need, and that's what you're getting. And I was like, well, but the challenge is we're dealing with a scenario in which ransomware groups have increased their capability exponentially. Like, they were guessing passwords, and now they've got access to ODAs.
Absolutely.
You've got APT groups that are incredibly aggressive. Like, you remember the telco hacks from 24, wasn't it, September? Yeah, the Salt Typhoon hacks. Like, they're exploiting vulnerabilities at scale, and we've got evidence that they're doing offensive vulnerability research. So they're
doing R&D.
They are, yeah. But ironically, many of those ODAs that they're finding are getting into the hands of criminals who are burning these ODAs at the scale. So the challenge that we have, I think, is the game has changed. The rules have changed fundamentally. The rules of engagement have changed. They've got exponentially better. And unless we can actually articulate that to senior executives, then to the point you'll get is, well, yeah, it's cyber. It's like, it's just an insurance,
and the risk tolerance is just a lot. It's completely different to what it should be when you can't articulate it properly. I know we've had a bit of a discussion around the effectiveness of the ban that the government put in place, but just want to close out this point. Do you think the ban is going to stick, and if anything, extend to all UK organisations, or do you think it's going to be shown to have no impact and it's going to disappear? Like, where do you think the ban's going?
Well, I tell you where I hope the ban is going.
Yeah.
I hope the ban is going towards, multiple nations sitting down and actually having a meaningful discussion around how we begin to address these issues. within, I think it was the 2018 IOCTA report within EC3. So IOCTA is the Internet Organised Crime Threat Assessment Report from the European Cybercrime Centre, which is part of Europol. Openly talks about the challenges law enforcement faces on the back of GDPR. So historically, if you wanted to get data, like who is data, like about registrations and so forth, it took about 15 seconds.
Yeah, it's available.
Now, in many cases, you've now got to go out and get an MLAT, which is a mutual legal assistance treaty. So we're making it harder to combat these issues. And another example would be something like No More Ransom. Like when we launched it, there was only like 4 parties that were part of this. And now obviously we see a multitude of different anti-ransomware initiatives, like effectively competing with one another. And it's frustrating for me because, when I ask people, have you heard of No More Ransom? It could be helpful. I get maybe 1 in 3, even at security conferences, by the way, which is just ridiculous. So what I hope will happen is we sit around the table, public sector, private sector, you're like what EC3 did around the JCAT, the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force, where you get law enforcement agencies from different territories sitting down and talking. And that, I hope, is the collaborative approach we take.
Let's actually use this to talk about No More Ransom. So you were kind enough, probably about 6 months ago, to do a CISO Q&A panel with us. And I think we asked the audience, about 100 cybersecurity professionals, we asked them, how many of you have heard of No More Ransom? And there was a depressingly small number of hands that went up. This is something that you found in 2016. Do you want to just talk a little bit to the audience about what No More Ransom does? Because for me, it's something that we tell all of our clients up front about, but it's a free resource and it can genuinely help them not pay a ransom.
Historically, ransomware used to be an attack on unavailability, so it would encrypt your data. In response to that, we work together with law enforcement on, obviously trying to support the disruption of criminal infrastructure. And there are instances where we can actually get access to decryption keys. So No More Ransom was established as a repository of free decryption keys. We don't ask you for your email address. We don't track your IP address. We will tell you what variant of ransomware you've been impacted by. And if we have a key, we will basically give it to you completely free of charge. So the whole premise of it was...
And this is global. Anyone can benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the whole premise of it was, like, historically, in these attacks, you have 2 options. Pay and potentially break the law. Or maybe suffer the economic impact of your business from not being able to access the data it needs in order to be able to serve your customers. That was it. Those are your 2 options.
Well, I mean, it's be strong, don't pay the criminals, have all of your customer data leaked and then used against them forever, and lose revenue for X amount of time until you wipe and restore and all the rest of it. So not two pretty bad options.
No dreadful options. So we said, well, look, there has to be a third option. So the third option was, well, let's get on the front foot and let's make these keys available. And so, I'm really appreciative of the other partners that kind of worked with us and kind of launched the initiative. And it's been around for a few years.
And what's the URL?
NoMoreRansom.org.
Yeah, so absolutely everyone, highly recommend you have a look at that site as first port of call, actually. What are, we've got hopefully, we've got a bunch of people watching this, listening, learning. As a final takeaway, what are 3 actions you would recommend that anyone in cybersecurity should do, as soon as they stop watching this?
I used to be the CISO of a very, very large organization. And I always used to laugh when the vendor would come into the room and say, trusted advisor. And I always said to him, I said, you're a vendor. You can't be the trusted advisor. You're here to make money off me.
Exactly.
And it's funny, I started to think about it and I thought, well, actually I do have trusted advisors. I have my, the company that provided the hardware for the majority of our infrastructure.
Right.
I knew their CTO really well. I wouldn't go out because I couldn't, because obviously conflicts of interest. And then I had the company that we bought our databases from. So it was a very, very large technology implementation. And then I started to think, actually, maybe vendors can be trusted advisors. and by the way, this is not like some weaselly way to say everyone connect with me on LinkedIn, but it's just to say that you don't know, and certainly as a CISO, I didn't know all of the answers, and having somebody that I could actually just pick up the phone to and say, oh gosh, okay, like for example, was it last week or the week before, Fortinet released 21 vulnerabilities, of which one of them, 2024 55591, was remotely executed in the wild. Like, hey, is that something I need to be concerned about?
Yeah.
Or, you know, I'm reading about the growth in the ODay exploitation. What do I need to do to protect myself?
Yeah.
Like, just having someone you can talk, and actually that's why, you know, I like to do these sessions with yourselves.
Yeah.
It's because that's the role of the partner. Like for me, that's the role of the partner, whereby you have the opportunity to talk to somebody that's not motivated by, well, you've got to buy a Rapid7 product. So like, by the way, I shouldn't say I would never do that, because I think like some of the team might not, but like that's not my role, right? It's not my role to do that.
You're the chief scientist.
Yeah. So I think, you know, identify your network of organizations that you can depend upon. And then second of all, just consider what happens in the Mike Tyson analogy if you do get punched in the face. Like, what is your plan? Who do you call? What's your call-off contract? Like, you know, being prepared is, I think it's a prerequisite in our industry. Like, you've got to anticipate something occurring. And so just kind of be prepared. And I think, and I think the most important thing you can do is, you know, just make sure that you refine the information and the data you have. And so, you know, we publish the emergent threat response within Rapid7 Labs, and we'll tell you, like, these are the critical vulnerabilities being exploited in the wild. We have Attacker KB, we have No More Ransom, we release Metasploit, we have Velociraptor. So, like, there's a multitude of things that you can get access to that can help you address this thing. So,
that's great.
Yeah, actionable intelligence, I think, is the kind of summary.
Yeah, I mean, what I've noticed career-wise is that in industries where you're in effect the goalkeeper, you know, cybersecurity being one, another one I can say is very similar would be like fraud teams. You know, you're every day, if you do your job, nothing happens. And when something does go wrong, then everyone blames you. So you can't win the game, but you can lose a game. And what I find is those kind of industries are incredibly tight-knit and forthcoming with sharing information. But it's not one of those where I win, you lose. Actually, everyone loses if companies have been compromised repeatedly. So I really want to echo what you said there in terms of establish a network, create a network of peers, speak to people, share best practice, share what you've learned, share what you've done badly, and learn from that as well. Because it's a job. It's a job that it never sleeps. You're constantly being attacked, and you know, if you do, I say sexy in cyber is when there's complete silence, when nothing goes wrong.
Well, yeah, but there is a growing body of research now. So, you know, we provided data to a Stanford study which analyzed the economic impact of vulnerabilities being identified and the impact it has on the share price of Fortune 500 companies. That's the nirvana that we're pushing towards. I'm not doing football analogies, by the way. My team are terrible, and I'm
QPR, so I wouldn't worry.
Okay,
can't be worse than me.
not much more. But there is a body of work to say I think here's what I want to stress to people.
Yeah.
The job and the career that you've chosen is not about, you know, XSPM, EASM, you know, like insert analogy and insert acronym and so forth here. If we think about the world around us, right, we've seen the role of digital being used to misinform and drive social conflict in the UK, right? Like last year, for example.
Absolutely.
We've seen, be careful because I'm going to get flamed, but like evidence to show that, you know, the potential for referendums to be influenced.
Correct.
By organizations who have a commercial interest in the outcome of that. We're seeing digital being used as a vehicle to, you know, in conjunction with traditional warfare. And I think the point is that if you think this is about computers, then you're not considering what this is about. This is about our ability, actually it has a direct impact on our GDP.
Yeah.
When there was the ransomware attack that happened, to the meat supplier. Do you remember that? And there was a wonderful story that was written
I remember that one.
in which the journalist actually started to interview the 0-hour contract staff that were working at the meatpacking company.
Right.
And they said, well, this ransomware attack occurred, all production stopped. I'm not earning any money.
Yeah.
And so this really does have a huge impact. I watched Equalizer 3. That's kind of why I remember the analogy of that. But that's the truth. It's one click of a keyboard and a business can no longer operate. And so I think, not to just kind of put too fine a point on it, we have to recognize and acknowledge the wonderful work we're doing as an industry.
100%.
And, kudos to everybody, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we literally are, in many cases, the last bastion of democracy. And that seems far-fetched.
Yeah.
But all of us can show examples where digital has been used to influence, what we think and what we believe about the people that we're asking to lead the country.
I mean, there are many government bureaus focused purely on stopping the threat of misinformation.
Is it working?
Well, again,
I'm interviewing you now, but
it's
working?
It's like anything cyber. You only know if it goes wrong. You don't know if it's working.
Well,
right?
Yeah, but integrity is a critical component of cyber, and yet all we ever think about in cyber is confidentiality or availability.
Yeah.
But actually maintaining that the integrity of, and what scares me the most is the advent and use of deepfakes. Yeah. Anyway, we could, I think it's like, this is volume 1. I think that's volume 9, right?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, just within this volume 1, you also brought out an incredibly salient point. There have been many studies in public equity markets that the best performing stocks are those that have a high proportion of overall spend being on cyber, and having various things, whether it's ISO or whatever else, having external benchmark certifications as well, is actually directly correlated to performance of the stock as well. So that's another point you brought in. And in the middle of everything else you said, I just wanted to highlight that one as well. But one more question for you. Is there anything I should have asked you, Roger, you think people should be aware of?
I mean, I think the most important question that you did ask was, where do I go for help?
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll call you, and what you're doing is you're pointing them to No More Ransom.
Correct.
No More Ransom actually is not just the availability of decryption keys. We also have the ability for you to be able to report the crime as well.
Yep.
And the likes of Metasploit, for example, the likes of Velociraptor. So, arm yourself with this information, arm yourself with the data that you need. But, fundamentally, it's an amazing industry. And for those of you sitting and listening to this, one of the things that I always try to do is I'll always go to a school, once a quarter to talk about a career in cyber. And in my old role, we actually sponsored the redevelopment of Bletchley Park, and we hired a teacher and so forth. So I would say, what I would ask is, myself and Amir and the Saepio team and the Rampant 7 team will do everything we can to give you
absolutely
open source tools, good advice, products and services as well. But fundamentally, we're here to do. If you can do, maybe once a year, go to your kid's local school, tell them about the job you do.
Yeah.
Because
educate, yeah.
It's such a rewarding industry, and it's frustrating for me when people don't see that, right? They kind of say, oh, well, I'm not technical, so I couldn't come into this industry.
No, there's a lot of people who aren't technical. And at Saepio, we do every, I think, 4 or 5 months, we bring on a bunch of Year 12 students to give them work experience and get them exposure to cyber, and deliberately not just those who want to be developers, non-technical people as well, but they see cyber as a growing and exciting industry. So 100% echoing what you're saying. I keep saying no more questions, but just like no more ransom, there's always more. We've touched upon, giving back, educating people, going into schools. If someone is at the start of their career, they want to get into cyber, what advice do you have for them? What path should they take? How should they start?
Well, I recently gave a talk at Manchester University. So Danny Dresner invited me up, and Actually, I've got the same question, but actually, to be fair, they were slightly further ahead.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, the question that I always ask people is, who do you follow on Twitter?
Yeah.
Okay, let's assume that we still use Twitter. Let's assume it's still 2020. Let's assume it's not X and it's not toxic and we've not killed our account. But like, whether it's Blue Sky, whether it's X, whether it's LinkedIn, who do you follow? And the reason I say that was because I actually hired somebody when I was at actually my old role. And this individual came from retail. And I ended up hiring this person to run the technical editing of all of our technical research.
Okay.
And he didn't come from cyber. He actually came from retail. But how I found him and how we kind of spotted him was he went on what was Twitter at the time. Yeah. He lurked for a period, started to learn, started to then engage and communicate and interact with the industry, started to, came to InfoSec, met the people, and all of a sudden we saw this passion from somebody who started to build their social network around this industry, and then started to articulate a level of commitment towards this industry. So I would say, who are you following? If you're following, Harry Kane and Marcus Rashford and et cetera, well, okay. But if this is an industry you want to get into, then, it should be people that are in this industry and see what they're talking about. Unfortunately, the InfoSec social media community is really fragmented now.
Yes.
There are still some on Twitter, so, on X, and still some. So it's challenging, but LinkedIn is an option.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a great idea. And I always find that with Twitter X, it's like my real-time feed of what's happening in the world.
Toxic though, isn't it?
It's very toxic, but it is about a week or two ahead of what I see on LinkedIn in terms of developments, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like a news feed. But yes, you have to fit. You need the algorithm on your site.
You do. Well, and it's harder and harder now to filter out the information that you don't really want to know, but that you're fascinated and you keep clicking into.
Correct. Absolutely clickbait. Yeah, perfect, brilliant. Well, thank you for that, Raj. Personal question, I guess about you and your career, that kind of thing. Is there anything that you wish a younger Raj, someone who wasn't chief scientist, someone earlier in their career, knew at the time?
I don't want to sound conceited, but it is about constantly learning. And I think I kind of knew that from the off. So I finished my master's. Yeah. I did 35 professional certifications across the MCSEs and certified ethical hackers and so forth. I can't tell you the number of papers, books, articles I've written in the hundreds. Yeah. It is hard work. Don't make the assumption that, I'm going to do a couple of exams and then I'm in and that's it. You have to constantly be a step ahead. Yeah. I remember actually I wrote the book, Applied Cybersecurity in a Smart Grid, because I wanted to learn and understand what it would take to take out a power grid, or IoT hacking. I had to learn that. There wasn't a course or anything anything to do that. When in with the Winter Olympics, when they were being targeted by a nation state group, they started to use steganography as a vehicle to target and break into organizations. That meant I had to learn and understand. Okay, what is this new tool that they're using, and how are they getting in? So, I mean, what's the one thing I wish I did? I think you just got to keep moving. You just got to keep learning, and there are no shortcuts to knowledge, and I think that's
understanding that,
and maybe that's the key point is when I interview people, sometimes I'll ask a question that is impossible for them to answer, not because I want to be horrible to them, but because I want to see how their brain handles, okay, well, there is something I don't know. How do I actually figure out how to learn something? Yeah. And I think that's just maintain that thirst for knowledge, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And just to kind of close it off, Raj, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Educational and enjoyable, and hopefully the audience agree as well. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the In Conversation series with Raj Samani. As Raj was leaving, he kindly offered to donate a signed copy of his book for the viewers of this episode. Have a look at the comments, click on the link, fill in the form and enter the prize draw to get a signed copy. Thank you so much.